Dancehall girl followed a gambler king. Until she saw her own face on a wanted sign, she danced for pennies in a forgotten frontier town. Until a charming stranger with blood on his hands promised her everything she'd ever dreamed of. But when Ruby Mae Carson saw her own face on a wanted poster, worth 500 dead or alive, she realized that following the wrong king can cost you more than your life. It can cost you your soul. The red dress had seen better days, like everything else in Perdition Creek. Ruby Mae Carson smoothed the worn silk with calloused hands, watching dust motes dance in the amber light that slanted through the saloon's grimy windows. The fabric had once been bright as fresh blood, but months of sweat, whiskey spills, and desperate nights had faded it to the color of old roses. She stood before the cracked mirror behind the bar, painting her lips with rouge that cost more than most folk saw in a week. The face staring back looked older than her 23 years. Dark circles shadowed eyes that had once sparkled with dreams of stages in San Francisco and audiences who'd throw real money instead of bent coins and empty promises. Ruby Mae. Sal's voice cracked like a whip from across the room. Get them boots moving, girl. The boys are getting thirsty, and thirsty men don't part with their silver easy. She turned toward the handful of miners and drifters scattered around the saloon's mismatched tables. Same faces as always. Old Pete, with his gray beard stained yellow from chewing tobacco. The Johnson brothers, fresh from their claim up the gulch, dirt still caked under their fingernails. Young Billy Martinez, barely old enough to drink, but old enough to stare at her with hungry eyes that made her skin crawl. Ruby may have been dancing in Sal's saloon for 2 years now, ever since the fever took her mother and left her with nothing but a trunk of faded dreams and a voice too small for the big theaters back east. She'd come to Perdition Creek following a traveling show that folded faster than a bad poker hand, leaving performers scattered across the territory like seeds on barren ground. The piano wheezed to life as Maple Pete's arthritic fingers found the keys. The same songs, night after night. Beautiful Dreamer and Oh, Susanna, played so many times the notes seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Ruby Mae stepped onto the small wooden stage, her heels clicking against boards that groaned under years of use. She began to move, letting the music carry her away from the stale air and leering faces. In her mind, she wasn't in a dusty saloon in a town that barely deserved a name. She was in a grand theater with velvet curtains and crystal chandeliers, dancing for gentlemen in fine suits who appreciated art instead of flesh. The coins came slowly at first. Pennies and nickels tossed onto the stage with the casual indifference of men buying cattle. She spun and swayed, her red skirt flowing like liquid fire, and tried to remember when dancing had felt like freedom instead of survival. It was during her second song that he walked in. He filled the doorway like he owned it, tall and lean with shoulders that spoke of strength without boasting about it. His black coat was cut fine, free of the dust that clung to every other soul in Perdition Creek. But it was his hands that caught her attention first, smooth and pale, with long fingers that had never known honest work. A gambler's hands. He moved through the saloon like water, finding its level, calm and sure of himself. Men shifted in their chairs without knowing why, some primal instinct warning them that a predator had entered their territory. But Ruby Mae couldn't look away. There was something in his dark eyes that promised things she'd almost forgotten how to want. The stranger took a seat at the corner table, the one that gave him a clear view of both the stage and the door. Smart man. He pulled out a deck of cards with practiced ease, the ivory and gold surfaces gleaming even in the saloon's dim light. When he looked up at her, Ruby Mae felt her heart skip like a stone across water. She finished her song to scattered applause and the usual collection of small coins. But as she bent to gather them, a silver dollar landed at her feet with a bright ring that silenced the room. Silver dollars were rarer than honest politicians in Perdition Creek. "Play something else," the stranger called out, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. Something with fire in it. Ruby Mae straightened, the silver dollar warm in her palm. She looked into his eyes and saw something that made her breath catch. Possibility. Here was a man who moved through the world like he owned it, who threw silver dollars like other men threw pennies, who looked at her like she was worth looking at. Maple Pete's fingers found a new melody, something with Spanish fire that made Ruby Mae's blood sing. She began to dance again, but this time it was different. This time she danced for an audience of one, letting the music carry her towards something that felt dangerously close to hope. The stranger watched her with the focused attention of a man studying cards before making his play. When she spun, her red skirt lifting like wings, he smiled. It was the kind of smile that promised adventures and whispered of roads leading far from dusty frontier towns. As the song ended and the last notes faded into silence, Ruby Mae stood, breathing hard, the silver dollar still clutched in her hand. The stranger rose from his table with fluid grace and walked toward the stage. The other men parted before him like tall grass before wind. "Silas Maddox," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "But most folks just call me King." Ruby Mae felt the weight of his gaze like sunlight after winter. In his eyes, she saw herself reflected not as a dance hall girl scraping by in a forgotten town, but as something precious, something worth saving. She didn't know yet that kings could be the most dangerous men of all. She thought she was following a gambler to freedom, until she watched those gentle hands deal death as easily as they dealt cards. 3 months on the dusty roads with Silas Maddox taught Ruby Mae Carson things they never sang about in dance hall songs. She learned that a man could smile while he killed, that silver could be painted over blood, and that love could grow in soil poisoned with lies. The wagon rolled through another nameless town at sunset, its wheels carving familiar ruts in earth that had seen too much suffering. Ruby Mae sat beside Silas on the driver's bench, her red dress replaced now with practical riding clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded eyes that had learned to watch for lawmen and angry victims in equal measure. "Goldfields just ahead, darling," Silas said, his voice carrying that honey smoothness that had first captured her heart. "Nice little mining town. Plenty of men with full pockets and empty heads." She nodded, though something cold had settled in her stomach like a stone. The last town, Whisper Falls, had ended with gunshots and a young bank clerk bleeding out in the dust while his mother screamed from the boardwalk. Silas had cleaned his hands afterward with the same care he used to polish his playing cards, whistling a tune she'd once danced to back in Perdition Creek. The wagon carried more than their belongings now. Hidden beneath false floorboards lay the fruits of their travels: gold dust from rigged games, paper money from threats barely veiled as friendly conversation, jewelry taken from women who'd trusted Silas's charming smile until his gun appeared in his hand. Each stolen treasure represented someone's dreams crushed beneath their wagon wheels. Ruby Mae had become essential to their success. She was the distraction, the pretty face that drew attention while Silas worked his deadly magic. She'd learned to laugh at the right moments, to flutter her eyelashes when men looked too closely at Silas's impossibly lucky hands, to create just enough chaos to cover their escapes when games turned violent. In Bent Creek, she'd spilled wine on a suspicious rancher's coat just as he reached for his gun. In Silver Junction, she'd started a fight between 2 miners while Silas cleaned out their friends at poker. In Dry Wells, she'd screamed and fainted, a perfect performance, giving Silas the precious seconds he needed to disappear after shooting the town's only doctor over a hand of 5-card stud. "You're getting good at this, Ruby Mae," Silas had whispered that night as they rode hard through moonless darkness, the doctor's blood still wet on his shirt. "Natural-born actress, you are." She'd wanted to feel proud of his praise, but pride had become a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she felt something dying inside her chest, something that had once danced for joy instead of survival. The wagon wheels found the ruts leading into Goldfield as the first stars appeared overhead. Ruby Mae studied the town with eyes that now automatically cataloged escape routes and potential threats. A single main street lined with false-fronted buildings. 1 saloon, 1 general store, 1 small bank with bars on the windows. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, which made their work both easier and more dangerous. "Same plan as always?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Silas's smile glittered in the fading light. You know me too well, darling. I'll set up a friendly game while you work your magic on the local boys. By tomorrow night, we'll be rich enough to buy ourselves a real hotel room instead of sleeping under stars. They made camp just outside town, near a stream that whispered secrets to the cottonwood trees. As Silas tended the horses, Ruby Mae watched him move with that predatory grace she'd once found exciting. His hands, those beautiful, deadly hands, brushed the animal's flanks with surprising gentleness. The same hands that had caressed her skin in passionate moments had also ended 3 men's lives in the past month alone. She remembered the first time she'd seen him kill. A card-sharpened tombstone had accused Silas of cheating, accurately, as it turned out. The accusation had barely left the man's lips before Silas's derringer appeared, as if by magic, the shot echoing through the saloon like thunder. The card sharp had crumpled to the floor, his own accusations dying with him. Self-defense, Silas had told the stunned crowd, his voice steady as stone. Man drew on me first. It was a lie, but delivered with such conviction that even Ruby Mae had almost believed it. That night, as they'd fled Tombstone with stolen gold jingling in their wagon, Silas had held her close beneath a canopy of indifferent stars. Sometimes a man has to make hard choices, Ruby Mae. The world's full of wolves, and sheep don't survive long without protection. She'd wanted to believe him then. Part of her still did, even now as she watched him check his weapons with the methodical care of a man who'd made peace with violence. Love, she discovered, could survive in the strangest soil, growing strong even when watered with blood and nourished by lies. But lately, in the quiet hours before dawn, she'd found herself thinking about the faces of their victims. The young clerk in Whisper Falls had reminded her of her cousin Timothy back in Missouri, all freckles and earnest hope. The rancher's wife in Bent Creek had clutched a daguerreotype of her children as Silas cleaned out her husband's wallet. The doctor in Dry Wells had been wearing a wedding ring that caught the lamplight as he fell. "Penny for your thoughts, darling," Silas said, settling beside her on the wagon's tailgate. His arm slipped around her waist with familiar possessiveness, and she leaned into his warmth despite the chill growing in her heart. "Just thinking about tomorrow," she lied, the words coming as easily now as breathing. "Tomorrow's going to be golden," he promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I can feel it in my bones. This little town's going to make us rich enough to head for California. Maybe even catch a ship to San Francisco. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Dancing on real stages again, wearing silk dresses that cost more than these desert rats make in a year." She nodded and smiled, playing her part even when they were alone. But as Silas talked about their future, painting pictures of wealth and respectability built on foundations of theft and murder, Ruby Mae found herself wondering who she was becoming. The girl who danced in Sal's saloon seemed like a stranger now, someone innocent and naive who believed the world could be changed with nothing more than grace and hope. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant as the eyes of judges. Tomorrow would bring another town, another con, another chance to chip away at what remained of her soul. But tonight, wrapped in the arms of a man she loved and feared in equal measure, Ruby Mae Carson closed her eyes and tried to remember what it felt like to dream of something other than escape. The stream whispered its secrets to the darkness, but Ruby Mae was no longer listening. She saw her own face on a wanted poster, and for the first time, Ruby Mae Carson didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. The wanted poster hung crooked on the weathered board outside Hanley's General Store, its edges curled by desert wind and morning sun. Ruby Mae Carson stopped dead in her tracks when she saw it, the blood draining from her face like water from a broken pitcher. Her own eyes stared back at her from the yellowed paper, not as she remembered herself, but as the world now saw her, cold, calculating, dangerous. The artist had captured something in her expression that she hadn't known was there, a hardness that sat wrong on features that had once been soft with hope. Beneath the sketch, bold letters spelled out her fate. Wanted, Ruby Mae Carson, known as the Crimson Rose. 500 reward for information leading to capture. Accomplice to murder and armed robbery. Extremely dangerous. $500. More money than she'd ever seen in one place. Enough to buy a man a new life or a woman a chance at respectability. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd become valuable at last, but for all the wrong reasons. Something wrong, darling? Silas's voice came from behind her, smooth as silk over steel. He'd been checking their supplies at the mercantile, preparing for another quick departure from another dying town. Goldfield had proven as profitable as he'd predicted, but their success had come at the usual cost in blood and broken dreams. Ruby Mae couldn't find words to answer. She stood transfixed by her own image, by the stranger wearing her face. When had her smile become a weapon? When had her eyes learned to lie so completely? The girl who danced for silver dollars in Perdition Creek felt like someone from a half-remembered dream. Silas moved up beside her, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that had once brought comfort. Now it felt like a brand marking her as his property. He studied the poster with the detached interest of a man reading someone else's obituary. Well, he murmured, a note of pride creeping into his voice. Look at that, Ruby Mae. You're famous now. The Crimson Rose, I like that. Has a nice ring to it, don't you think? She wanted to scream. Instead, she found herself nodding, playing her part even as something cracked inside her chest like ice breaking under spring sun. $500, she whispered. That's more than most folks see in a lifetime. Shows how good you've gotten at this business, Silas said, pressing a kiss to her temple. My little rose, blooming so beautifully in the desert. But Ruby Mae wasn't thinking about beauty or blooming. She was thinking about the faces hidden behind that reward money. All the people they'd hurt, all the lives they'd shattered for silver and gold. The young clerk in Whisper Falls, bleeding out while his mother screamed. The widow in Bent Creek, clutching her children's photograph as Silas took her late husband's life savings. The doctor in Dry Wells, whose steady hands would never heal another soul. Each stolen dollar in their wagon represented someone's dreams turned to ash. Each piece of jewelry hidden beneath false floorboards had been torn from fingers that had worn them with love. She'd helped take it all, smiling while hearts broke and futures crumbled. Come on, Silas said, his hand guiding her away from the poster. Let's get out of this dust trap before someone with sharp eyes and a good memory comes along. They walked back toward their camp in silence, but Ruby Mae felt eyes following them from every shadow. Had that shopkeeper looked at her too long? Did the woman sweeping her porch recognize the face from the wanted poster? Every stranger became a potential threat, every glance a possible death sentence. Their wagon sat where they'd left it, loaded with supplies and hidden wealth. Silas began hitching the horses with practiced efficiency, whistling the same tune he'd hummed after killing the doctor. The sound made Ruby Mae's skin crawl. Where to next? She asked, though she dreaded the answer. Heard tell of a settlement called Peaceful Valley about 2 days' ride north, Silas replied, checking the harness straps. Bunch of homesteaders trying to scratch out a living from hardpan dirt. The kind of folks who keep their life savings in mason jars and trust anyone with a friendly smile. Ruby Mae climbed onto the wagon bench, her hands trembling as she smoothed her riding skirt. Peaceful Valley. Even the name sounded like innocence, like everything she'd lost and could never reclaim. She imagined families there, mothers hanging wash on lines, fathers teaching sons to work the land, children playing in dusty yards while their parents planned for futures that would never come. Because Silas Maddox was coming to Peaceful Valley, and Ruby Mae Carson would help him destroy it. You've been quiet today, Silas observed as they rolled out of Goldfield. Something eating at you, darling. She looked at him, really looked, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time. The handsome face that had captured her heart in Sal's saloon, the smooth hands that had dealt her dreams along with marked cards, the smile that promised everything and delivered only sorrow. He was beautiful and terrible, like a rattlesnake coiled in morning sunshine. Just tired, she lied, the words bitter as alkali dust on her tongue. But as the wagon wheels turned and Goldfield fell behind them, Ruby Mae found herself thinking about mirrors. The wanted poster had shown her one reflection, the cold-eyed criminal the world saw when they looked at her. But somewhere inside, another mirror waited, one that might show her who she used to be, who she might still become, if she found the courage to look. The sun climbed higher, baking the desert floor until it shimmered like water. Heat waves rose from the hard pan, distorting the horizon until reality became fluid, negotiable. Ruby Mae watched the mirage dance and wondered if redemption might be just another desert phantom, always visible but never reachable. Behind them, dust marked their passage like a scar across the earth. Ahead lay peaceful valley and whatever innocence they would destroy there. But for the first time since leaving Perdition Creek, Ruby Mae Carson began to wonder if there might be a third choice, something other than following or fleeing. The wanted poster had shown her the woman she'd become. Now she had to decide if that woman was who she truly wanted to be. She had to choose between the man she loved and the woman she used to be. And sometimes love means letting go of everything that's destroying your soul. Peaceful valley spread before them like a prayer answered in wood and hope. Ruby Mae Carson watched from the wagon bench as children played in dusty yards while their mothers hung, washing on lines that stretched between modest homes. Gardens struggled against the desert heat, tended by hands that believed in tomorrow despite the harshness of today. It looked exactly like the kind of place she'd dreamed of as a child, before hunger taught her to dance for coins, before desperation led her to follow silver promises down roads paved with blood. "Look at them," Silas murmured beside her, his voice carrying that familiar hunter satisfaction. "Lambs waiting for slaughter. This is going to be easier than taking candy from babies." Ruby Mae felt something twist in her chest like a knife finding its mark. These weren't marks or targets or obstacles to their wealth. These were people trying to build lives from dust and dreams, the same way she'd once hoped to build something beautiful from the ashes of her mother's death. Their wagon rolled down the single main street, drawing curious but friendly glances from the settlers. A woman in a faded blue dress waved from her porch, a baby on her hip and flour on her apron. Two boys raced alongside the wagon for a few yards, laughing and whooping before their father called them back with gentle authority. The settlement's heart was a simple wooden building that served as both general store and meeting hall. A sign painted in careful letters proclaimed it Henderson's Mercantile Community Center. Through the open doors, Ruby Mae could see families gathered around rough-hewn tables, sharing an evening meal with the easy intimacy of people who'd chosen to face the world together. "Perfect," Silas said, pulling up near the store. "Nothing like a community gathering to separate folks from their money. They'll be so busy being neighborly, they won't notice when their pockets get lighter." He climbed down from the wagon with fluid grace, already transforming himself into the charming stranger who'd swept Ruby Mae off her feet in Perdition Creek. She'd watched this performance dozens of times now, the slight adjustment of his coat, the practiced smile, the way he held his shoulders to suggest strength without threat. But this time, something was different. This time, Ruby Mae saw past the performance to the predator beneath. "You coming, darling?" Silas asked, extending his hand to help her down. "Time to earn our supper." Ruby Mae took his hand, her fingers trembling as they touched his palm. She'd held these hands in passion and watched them deal death with equal skill. Now, standing in the dusty street of Peaceful Valley with innocent laughter floating on the evening air, she finally understood the weight of her choices. Inside Henderson's store, the community had gathered for their weekly meal, a tradition that allowed neighbors to share food and news, joy and sorrow. Ruby Mae watched an elderly man carve meat while children waited patiently for their turn. She saw women passing bowls of beans and cornbread, ensuring everyone had enough before taking their own portions. This was what family looked like when it stretched beyond blood, when people chose to care for each other despite having little to spare. Silas worked the room like a master musician playing a familiar tune. Within minutes, he'd introduced himself as a traveling businessman, complimented the women's cooking, and expressed admiration for the community spirit. Cards appeared in his hands as if by magic, and soon half the men were gathered around a table, convinced they could outsmart the charming stranger. Ruby Mae played her part, smiling and chatting with the women while keeping one eye on Silas's game. But every word felt like swallowing glass. Mrs. Henderson showed her a daguerreotype of the son she'd lost to fever, tears still fresh in her eyes despite months of grieving. Young Mary Collins talked excitedly about her upcoming wedding to a rancher's son, her face glowing with hopes that Ruby Mae and Silas would surely destroy. As the evening wore on, Ruby Mae found herself standing outside, breathing air that tasted of sage and distant rain. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and distant as the eyes of judges. She thought about the wanted poster in Goldfield, about the stranger wearing her face, about all the mirrors that had shown her who she'd become. Getting some air? The voice belonged to Sarah Henderson, the storekeeper's wife, a woman whose kindness had shone through every word they'd shared. "It's beautiful out here," Ruby Mae said, the truth surprising her with its simplicity. "We think so," Sarah agreed, settling beside her on the store's front steps. "Of course, it's not easy living. The desert takes more than it gives, and we lose folks regular to hardship or heartbreak. But there's something to be said for building something with your own hands, for knowing your neighbors will help when trouble comes calling." Ruby Mae felt tears threaten, though she couldn't say why. "How do you do it? How do you keep believing in goodness when the world's so full of wolves?" Sarah studied her with eyes that had seen their share of sorrow. "I reckon the wolves only win if we become them, child. Long as there's folks willing to choose kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, the light keeps burning." Through the store windows, Ruby Mae could see Silas's card game reaching its climax. Money changed hands with increasing frequency, and she recognized the signs. He was setting up the big play, the moment when he'd clean out every man at the table. Tomorrow, these good people would wake to find their dreams stolen along with their savings. Children would go hungry. The wedding Mary Collins planned would never happen. Dreams would turn to dust, and it would be Ruby Mae's fault as much as Silas's. "Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "what if someone you loved was not what you thought they were? What if staying with them meant becoming something terrible?" The older woman was quiet for a long moment, watching heat lightning flicker on the horizon. "Love ain't about holding on to someone who's drowning you, child. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go, even when it breaks your heart into 1,000 pieces." Inside the store, Silas laughed at something one of the men said, the sound carrying through the night air like poison. Ruby Mae closed her eyes and saw all their victims again. The young clerk, the widow, the doctor, dozens of faces she'd tried to forget. She saw Peaceful Valley as it would be tomorrow if she did nothing. Broken, betrayed, another scar on the earth's face. She thought about mirrors again, about the woman on the wanted poster and the girl who'd once danced with genuine joy. Somewhere between those two reflections lay the truth of who she could still choose to be. Ruby Mae Carson stood up slowly, dust falling from her skirt like the weight of old sins. Through the window, she could see Silas preparing for his final, devastating play. The money on the table represented these people's futures, seed for next year's crops, medicine for the sick, hope for children who'd never been given much reason to believe in tomorrow. She walked to the store's back door and found what she was looking for, a lantern filled with kerosene, matches scattered on a nearby shelf. Her hand shook as she struck a match, watching the small flame dance in the darkness. Such a tiny thing to carry so much power. The wanted poster had called her the Crimson Rose, but roses could bloom in many colors. Some bloomed red with passion, others white with innocence. Tonight, Ruby Mae Carson chose to bloom with the fire of redemption, even if it burned everything she'd thought she loved. She walked back toward the card game, the lit lantern hidden beneath her shawl. Through the windows, she could see Silas's hands moving with deadly precision, dealing cards that would steal these good people's dreams. But sometimes, Ruby Mae had learned, the only way to stop a wildfire was to start a smaller, more controlled burn. As she reached for the door handle, she whispered a prayer to whatever gods watched over dance hall girls and fallen women seeking grace. It was time for her final performance, time to dance one last dance. not for silver dollars or applause, but for the chance to remember who she used to be. The desert wind picked up, carrying the scent of distant rain. Somewhere in that vastness, Ruby Mae Carson hoped there might still be room for redemption, even for a woman who'd learned to love the wrong king.